Good evening, Professor Charles. My name is Cortina Duck, and my topic is going to be vehicular crime scene investigation. I'm going to give my brief synopsis of what I think is the best summation for this topic. Hello again. So, TV shows like CSI, viewers get to watch the investigators collect tangible evidence. They collect evidence at the scene of a crime, making blood appear as if it's magic, swabbing every mouth in the vicinity. Um, and many of us believe we have a pretty good grip on the process. And rumor has it criminals are getting the jump on the good guys using the tips they pick up off these TV shows as far as forensics go. So, I'd like to give you my explanation. The vehicle crime scene investigation is the meeting point of where science, logic, and law meet. Processing a crime is a long, tedious process that involves purposeful documentation of the conditions at the scene, um, and the collection of any physical evidence that could possibly illuminate what happened at the point to who did it, so to speak. There is no typical crime scene. There is a typical body of evidence, though, and there is no typical investigation approach either. At any given crime scene, a CSI might collect dried up blood from a window pane without letting his arm brush the glass in case there are any latent fingerprints there. Um, they may lift hair off a victim's jacket using tweezers so it doesn't disturb the fabric enough to shake off any of the white powder, um, which may or may not be cocaine, um, in the folds of the sleeves, or use a sledgehammer to break through a wall that seems to be the point of origin for a terrible smell. So, who do you ask is at the scene? At the first response, police officers are one of the people. Are there at the scene, and they are typically the first to arrive at the crime scene. They arrest the perpetrators, um, and is still there that are still there, and call for an ambulance if necessary. They're responsible for securing the scene so no evidence is destroyed. There's also the CSI unit. They are the ones who document the crime scene in detail and collect any physical evidence. Possibly there might be a district attorney at the scene and is often present to help determine if the investigators require any search warrants to proceed and obtain those warrants from a judge. 9 times out of 10, a vehicular investigation is going to have fatalities, and there's a medical examiner at the scene if is fatalities from a homicide or drunk driving, things of that nature, and they may or may not need to be present to determine the preliminary cause of death. Others that are at the scenes may be specialists like entomologists, forensic scientists, forensic sociologists, um, may be called in if the evidence require expert analysis. Detectives, like I said earlier, are there interviewing witnesses and consult with the CSI unit. They investigate the crime by following leads provided by witnesses and physical evidence. All the while, the physical evidence is itself is the only part of the equation. The ultimate goal is to get a conviction of the perpetrator of the crime. So while the CSI scraps off the dry blood without smearing any prints, lifts several hairs without disturbing any trace of evidence, and smashes through a wall in the living room. They're considering all of the necessary steps to preserve the evidence in its current form. Um, what the lab can do with it, with the evidence, in order to reconstruct the crime or identify the criminal, and the legal issues involved in making sure the evidence is admissible in court. So, CSI will arrive on the crime scene and make sure that it's secure. The CSI person will do an initial walkthrough to get an overall feel for the crime scene, finds out if anyone moved anything before he or she arrived, and generates initial theories based on visual examinations. He or she will then note make notes of the potential evidence. At this point, he or she touches nothing. The CSI thoroughly documents the scene by taking photos and drawing sketches during the second walkthrough. Sometimes the documentation stages include a video walkthrough, maybe as well. He or she may document the scene as a whole and documents anything she finds identified as evidence, and still touching nothing at the scene. Okay, so now it is time to begin to touch stuff, and it's done very, very carefully. The CSI systematically makes her way to, through the scene, collecting all potential tangible evidence, tagging it, logging it, and packaging it so it can remain intact on its way to the lab. Depending on the task of the breakdown of the CSI unit he or she works for and her area of expertise, he or she may not analyze the evidence in the lab. The crime lab processes all the evidence the CSI collects at the crime scene, and when the lab results are in, they go to the lead detective on the case. Every CSI handles the unit of the division. Every CSI unit handles the division between field work and lab work differently. What goes on at the crime scene is called crime scene investigation or analysis. And what goes on in the laboratory is called forensic science. Not all CSI investigators are forensic scientists. Some CSI workers only work in the field and they collect the evidence and then pass it on to the forensic lab. In this case, the CSI must still process a good understanding of forensic science in order to recognize the specific value of various types of evidence in the field. But in many cases, these jobs do overlap. So, vehicular crime scene investigation is a massive undertaking. Examples of my best ideas that would include cause, vehicular crime scenes investigation.